So, how's it going, guys? This is Ryo Murata, photographer based in Tokyo. So I finally purchased a printer, yes. So in my previous video, I sort of like raised the surface that my Canon Pro 10 printer died of fair abuse, not total abuse. And it was basically the printer that I used to sort of make my artwork back when I shot with digital. And because that printer died, I basically was looking for alternatives. Obviously, as of 2023 actually, Canon Pro 10 is an A3 size printer, photography printer actually, and there's basically four actually versions that sort of fit in that category basically. And from the Canon side, we have the S1 G1. In Japan actually, in North America you guys call it the Pro 200, Pro 300, and from the Epson side of you, in Japan we have the SC PX1VL and the PX1V, aka in North America you guys call it the Surecolor P700, P900, which prints A3 size paper. But I realized over the course of the years that I used my printer, I never printed A3 size, that massive size. And for your information, A3 size is two A4 size papers combined together, so that's pretty big actually. And when I was looking at my artwork that I did in the past, I only printed like 11 by 14, and that's not that big actually. And 11 by 14, if you guys know, is a standard for in the fashion industry actually. People tend to like print on 11 by 14. I think it's something that came from the film era, but I never printed larger than that. And at the same time, I did not see that need for printing 11 by 14 as of now during the pandemics. I thought like A4 would be much better in my opinion. So I was basically like looking around, researching, and came across this Epsons EW-M873T, which is hard to pronounce in Japan. In North America, you guys call it the ET-8550 EcoTank model. And keep note that there is an A3 size version of this which uses the same ink, but it just prints bigger actually. This is basically the A4 size that I purchased, and can't they like make the name the same for North America and Japan so people will get screwed over? So yeah, there's like so much to talk about, so little time, and for the majority of people who watch my YouTube videos, you guys know that there are a lot of people who are new to photography who don't have that knowledge, so I try to like tell you guys from as a beginner's like standpoint, because if I talk in a professional view, you guys won't understand what I'm going to be talking about. So to make it easier for you guys, I'm going to break it down for you guys. So what makes a professional photography printer professional? That's a hard question to answer, but to sum it up, I would say that a professional printer typically uses something in between 8 to 10 to 12 ink cartridges, and with a bit of salt added to that. And the more ink cartridges you use, the easier it is to achieve a specific color in that RGB spectrum actually, or sRGB. But the opposite is true, where if you have less ink cartridges, it's harder or almost impossible to achieve that specific color that you're trying to like print out from your Photoshop or any kind of like photo editing software. And there's a lot of factors such as having a fully calibrated monitor to get the exact same results, but I'm not going in there. I'm going to be talking about printer specifically. But what's interesting is this Epsons EW-M873T uses 6 colors, but what's interesting about the 6 colors is within the 6 color, one of them uses a pigment ink, and the remaining 5 is a dye type of ink. And typically a professional printer comes in 2 flavors, and one is it uses a pigment type of ink, and another one uses a dye type of ink. Unfortunately, if I'm right, as of 2023, Canon has one pigment printer for the professional and one dye type of professional like printer, the S1 and G1. What was it called? Pro 200 and Pro 300. One's a dye type and another one is a pigment type. While on the Epson side, I think if I'm right, the Surecolor 700 and the ET-900, I don't know which one it is. They're both, oh wait, they're both pigment type of printer. And you guys probably don't know it, but the characteristics of a pigment type of printer is, one, they don't degrade over time, over the extended period of time. And this can be said because if you look at the artwork made by professional like artists who did oil paintings and stuff like that, you guys probably noticed that the majority of those artworks are like pigment based. And pigment based basically means, like I said, they don't degrade over time. So over the century, over the 200 years, 300 years, over the course of the year, the artwork that remained throughout the history is basically some kind of oil-based type of like material used to make that like artwork. Same for photography. If it's a pigment-based ink, it basically can have a longevity of, it can basically survive like 10 to 100 years over the course of the years. And even the manufacturers basically push on that, you know, characteristics because pigment lasts almost eternity. But there is a cost to that, and that cost is the price. These pigment type of printers are harder to manufacture because it uses a specific type of sort of like I don't know, nozzle to sort of like print onto the paper, and also the ink itself is going to be much more expensive. And in addition to that, this is another con, which is you guys probably have experienced it during middle schools when you did some kind of oil painting. That oil painting got onto your clothes or onto your hand. You guys probably had a hard time taking that off using water because water and oil doesn't mix, and therefore it's harder to like take that oil off and get like pissed off. So that's what I'm trying to say. However, because it's harder to get off, it means that even if it gets affected by the environment, it won't do that much damage over the course of the year. And I have to mention, in addition to that, because what we call the ink itself is sort of like muddy, it's like harder to get off, it means that there's a higher chance that it might clog up the head of the printer head. And that frequently happens, and if it does, you have to get it fixed, and because of that, the maintenance cost goes way higher than a typical printer. So on the other hand, we have the dye type of printers, and these are basically the consumer type of printers. 100% of these consumer types of printers are dye ink. The reason why manufacturers use dye is basically dye type of ink is easier to like produce, easier to manufacture the printer itself, and at the same time, because dye type of ink is similar to sort of like acrylic paint. If you get it on your hand, if you get it on your clothes, you can just wash it, throw it in the washing machine, and can get off easily. And due to that properties of being sort of like soluble to water, the sort of like, it's hard to explain to you guys, but it's like acrylic, so it means that it's more saturated, more vivid when you actually print onto paper, and that means that these types of dye type of ink actually perform really well on glossy type of paper, because glossy paper has a lot of like vividness going on, you know, when you print it on. So if you do that type of photography, it will suit that. And at the same time, there are negatives to that. And because dye type of ink, as the name says, dye is you're basically dyeing stuff onto clothes or maybe onto paper. You're basically sort of like dyeing it through into the paper, which means that there's going to be some kind of bleeding going on. And if it bleeds, it also means that it can get affected by the external like weathers and maybe water or rainfall and stuff like that, because that ink itself is already bled into the paper. If water or if rain basically hits that paper, it can like wash out and that image can get ruined. So that's basically a negative of using a dye type of printer. And also, like I said, compared to pigment, which don't degrade over time, dye type of printers, the images that you print onto the paper tend to degrade over time. So this is basically sort of like a toss-up between pigment printer versus the dye type of printers. Pigments to printers, you get deeper blacks, so if you do monochrome and stuff like that, obviously pigment style printers are the best that manufacturers can offer to you. While if you do vivid, colorful stuff of printing, or if you shoot those types of photos, dye type of printers do that. Do you want richer blacks or do you want vivid color? And this is sort of like a toss-up, and like I said, I mean, depending on your personal preference, you can choose one over the other, but you, like, in order to get something, you have to like sacrifice something, and this is basically that. And also, like I said, the pigments type of printers get clogged up easily, while the dye type of printers tend to not get clogged up because they're like I said, acrylic. They're like water soluble, and it's not muddy at all. It's like really watery, so it's harder for the printer to get clogged up using a dye type of printer. So okay, so after covering pigment and dye, going back onto topic, the Epsons EW-M873T. This is interestingly fits in between the consumer and the professional. This printer specifically uses 6 colors, and within the 6 colors, 5 of them are actually dye based, while one, the black, is actually pigment based, which is really interesting. And like I said, pigment does really well, especially when you're doing monochromes, and also if you want to emphasize on the shadow areas, pigment actually does that. And this printer itself has that black, and it also has photo black, which is more tend towards the what I call, if you do glossy, vivid type of work, it can basically offer a sort of like a glossy like type of image going on in your photos. And in addition to that, what makes this printer really interesting, it has a gray ink, and not many people who do reviews of like printers talk about this, but in photography world, gray is super important, and I want to emphasize so much on this because it might be much more important than the black actually, because typically on a consumer grade sort of like printer, gray doesn't exist, and in order to achieve gray, you need to mix either cyan and yellow or magenta in order to get gray, because gray is basically in between black and white, right? But on every type of photo, gray exists, and if you print using a printer that doesn't have gray, what happens is that the computer thinks it's making gray from that cyan and the magenta. However, when we get that printed out and see and physically, we realize that it's either going to be slightly tinted to the magenta or it's going to be slightly tinted to the cyan, no matter what the case. And it's actually really hard to create that gray color. However, this printer itself already has a gray ink, which means that there's no hassle going on in mixing 2 colors to achieve that. This printer already has a gray ink, so you can basically achieve the black, gray, and white without any problems. It uses Epson's EcoTank like mechanism, and I myself 100% used Canon printers. I used the Pro 10, and that's basically it actually. And Canon never has something like this, and it's like something that Epson should promote more, because after using it, I'm like really shocked, because if you use a professional printer, you know that you frequently have to change the ink cartridges on every print session, no matter what. This is due to the fact that there's like so many ink cartridges, like 8 to 10, and one runs out really quickly, and these cartridges are really small. However, this Epson's printer itself, because it uses an EcoTank, what EcoTank is you get this like bottle of ink, and what you do is you basically unscrew the lid, open the lid of that designated sort of like tank, you just pop it in from the top, just let go, and it basically automatically refills from 0 to 100 maximum, and after it reaches there, it basically automatically stops. There's a mechanism that basically stops ink from flowing in there, so you won't have any leakage and stuff like that. And after it like gets to the top, you just basically remove the ink, and even now it won't leak at all, and you basically close the lid, and that's basically it. So this is like something that's really nice as a photographer, because by using this system, what happens is that Epsons basically can sort of like, you can basically do extended period of printing without refilling your like ink tank, and refilling ink tanks or changing the cartridges of your printer, you're basically wasting like 5 minutes or 10 minutes on that session. And even if you stick in that ink cartridges into that Canon printer, sorry Canon, in order to boot up, it's going to take 3 minutes or so, and you're basically wasting valuable time. However, this on the other hand, you can basically just refill it once when it hits 0, and you can basically continue printing for probably half a month or so, maybe, or 3 months, depending on how frequently you print. So this printer itself, like I said, I can print up to A4 size, and I can basically print anything below that. So I can basically print postcard size, 2L size, B5, B6 if I'm right, then A4. So there's a wide choice of paper available, and for some people, if I'm making some kind of artwork, it's going to be A4 size, obviously, but I can also do test prints, which is really nice. So typically, you guys probably know paper, the larger it gets, it's going to get much more expensive. The smaller it gets, it's going to get cheaper. So if I do test prints on like a postcard size paper, I'm basically like saving some cost. And if I want the real like deal of like printing A4 size, I can basically do these like test prints until I get my desired results. And that's like really nice in my opinion, because probably I'm going to use this printer for test printing and making the A4 final prints. So that's also a great thing to know. And also, all printers have this function, but you can basically load it from the front. You can load the paper from the front or from the back. So if you live in a small room as I do, you can basically load paper from the bottom, and it basically like retrieves that paper and kind of rolls it forward and prints it on there. So I really don't need that much space to put this printer itself. And like I said, because it's A4 size, it's lightweight, not too heavy like an A3 paper printer that's weighs like what, 20 kilograms or so. So you can basically move it wherever you want. So, and unfortunately, I haven't done rigorous testing and stuff like that, but I printed my Love Hotel series. My parents are gonna kill me, but I printed my Love Hotel series in Nuguisudani, and so far I'm having good results on this from this printer actually, and I actually like the color, the sort of like small vividness going on, because I don't like super vivid like colors, so I use like some kind of luster type of paper. I might make a video on like paper selection in Japan actually, so going a little bit off topic, but so far I'm having a great time with this printer. And yeah, and if there was one or two things I need to mention about Epson's printer specifically, this is going to be a super geeky thing, but I realized it after purchasing this printer, and this is actually the same for the more professional series of PX1V, the Surecolor, well, it's called Surecolor P700 and P900. These like what I call more professional type of printers have a maintenance box, and these things actually never existed in the Canons lineup, unfortunately. And what it does is, you guys probably know that printer runs ink in order to like function, and probably some people don't know, but it does this due to the fact that, like I said, these printer heads can get clogged up, and in order to prevent that from happening, the manufacturers, both Canon and Epson, frequently runs ink so that it won't get clogged up. So, but people are curious, like, where does that ink go? And from the Canon side, they sort of like dump that ink onto a sponge on the left side of the printer. Especially my Canon Pro 10 was like that. And if I'm right, the S1, G1 printers probably do that the same. However, for the Epson's printers itself, instead of dumping that onto a sponge, what Epson thought was that they realized that they should stick that ink into sort of like a different like cartilage within this sort of like printer. This printer that I purchased, the EW-M873T, actually has a sort of like a dedicated cartilage where it kind of dumps that ink that it used to sort of like clean the head in here, and it kind of basically stockpiles that ink, and once it gets filled up, you basically throw that out, and honestly you have to purchase sort of like a separate cartilage, basically a maintenance box, and just slide it in there. But what's great about this is that if we compare it with the Canons, because it dumped ink onto sort of like a sponge on the left side, that could leak out, and it could like, because it's on the left side, it could like interfere with what you're printing, and it gets messy in the long run. I learned it the hard way. But Epson, like I said, they have a dedicated area, dedicated box where it kind of stores that ink in there, so you won't have any leakage or any problems with that, which is like really nice. And these, like what I call maintenance box, cost roughly $10 to $15 if I'm right. So it depends on how frequent you print, but this is sort of like a tip if you're like ever printing with these sort of like semi-professional, professional type of printers. I highly suggest printing everything in one run, because every time you boot up that printer, it's gonna like basically use ink to like clean the head, and you're basically wasting valuable ink. So what I do is if there's something I want to print, I basically print on that specific day throughout the day. So I basically utilize that ink just once and for all actually. So hope that makes sense for you. So yeah, I haven't done rigorous testing. I never do monochrome, so I can't vouch for how deep the black is gonna look, unfortunately, but that's something I will find for the years to come and the days to come and the years to come. So yeah, unfortunately I probably haven't covered everything, but I basically mentioned what's important. And at the same time, like, it was interesting because when I actually purchased it, it already came with this, you know, refill bottle. And this is like really interesting because when I actually refilled it from 0 to 100%, I basically used like 80%. So this bottle has 70 milliliters, so I probably used like 50 milliliters or 60 milliliters in one refill. So if I want to refill my sort of like printer from 0 to 100, I need to purchase another one of these. However, this 70 milliliters is a lot, so that means I won't have to like refill it in the long term. So that's like really nice to see. And last but not least, this is Epson's type of printers typically have some kind of calibration software already pre-installed, and this is completely different from Canons because Canons did not have it, if I'm right. Not this efficient actually. So they basically give you time to sort of like print 5-6 sheets of paper, test sheets, and it kind of tells you, okay, so out of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines, which looks super straight, because depending, and this is sort of like a problem that I guess occurs when you manufacture printers, the head, I guess the location of a head, there's like slight like movements when they get produced, type A and type B, although they're the exact same, you know, products, there's this minimal, like, I guess, changes, or I guess you need to calibrate it in software for it to work. And Epson already has that already packaged. Once you like download the software from the internet, actually, you can basically calibrate it to your needs, and it basically sort of, it's hard to see it unfortunately, but there's like 7 lines, and one's like tilted to the left and one's tilted to the right, and you basically have to find which one where that it coincides. And by doing that, what happens is when you actually like do the actual prints like this, so the lines that it prints is completely straight, and there's like no slight differences going on, so that's like really good. And you can basically sort of like enhance that sort of like efficiency of like printing using their software, so that's like actually something great to see. So yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully I covered not everything, but probably like 70-80%. Obviously I need to do more rigorous testing, and to give you guys an overall verdict, that's gonna probably come out 2 years or maybe 3 years after heavy abuse. And at the same time, I'm like curious how long these ink will last over the, you know, course of the printing process, because yeah, I was like super pissed on changing the, you know, ink cartridge every time on the Canon, and throughout the what you call the whole professional lineups of printers, that's takes a lot of time and effort. You know, you install the ink cartridge, you have to wait 3 minutes until it boots up, and you start printing and another ink gets run out. I'm like, oh crap, kinda. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. We will see you next time. Peace out. Keep printing, keep shooting, keep editing.